when we talk about the reduction in default mode network and activating a task positive network, and how often can a human do that? Because it's a natural tendency to go into default mode network, and it's a very conscious choice to switch that thing off and then activate our task positive networks or a salient network. Welcome to Leaders of Future. I'm your host Manish Behl. Welcome Dr. Loucks.
Thank you, Manish.
How can we build that more as a habit or behavior?
There's different forms of concentration practice that are in some of the Buddhist underpinnings. One is more of like a narrow focus where we pick a target, an object of meditation or an object of focus that we want to be on, and we're just with it. Another form of concentration is more open, where we're just with what is present right now in our thoughts, emotions, physical sensations. And so there's times to be on each, like say if we're working on a particular task, we might want to narrow in our concentration and really focus on that. But if we're at a gathering, a social gathering, or maybe in a meeting, we might want to be seeing the body language of everybody in the room through our eyes, listening carefully to what everybody's sharing, and then seeing what arises in ourselves and what seems would be an important contribution to make to that meeting, along with the deep listening that we do. And that might be more of an open form of concentration. And with meditation, we can train both of those. Maybe one of the most basic forms of meditation, like just say on the breath, or another object of meditation, like say the palms of the hands or the soles of the feet, or even sound. We're training ourselves to have that narrow focus. And the mind is going to wander thousands of times, millions of times probably. And when it does, just notice that, notice where it went, and does it often go to that spot? And in doing so, we actually get to know ourselves better, and the self-awareness comes. And then we invite the mind to come back to that object of meditation, whether it's the breath or whatever it is. And so we start to get better at concentrating and just seeing what arises. I think for most of us, we probably spend more time in default mode than is ideal, but it's not a bad thing to spend time in there. But with all the distractions that we have these days, it can be helpful to train ourselves in concentration practice. And there's real strategies to do that, like some of the ones I just mentioned.
Very warm welcome to Leaders of Future, where we will explore the science, the skill, and the spirit that's shaping tomorrow's leadership. I'm your host Manish Behl. I'm founder of Mindfulness India Summit and Mindful Science Center in India. Today, our world is changing faster than ever. Burnout is at all-time high, and leaders are expected to be both visionaries and deeply human. According to a recent study, nearly 77% of professionals have experienced burnout in the past year. At the same time, technologies like artificial intelligence, on the BCI, and many other technologies which are coming now, transforming every aspect of how we work and how we're going to be living. That's why this series is so important right now. We need leaders who are not just tech savvy, but also resilient, compassionate, and self-aware. We need teams to improve focus, lower stress, and also do a creative decision making. I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Loucks, Professor and Director of Mindfulness Center at Brown University, a pioneer in bringing rigorous science to mindfulness and mindful leadership.
Well, thank you, Manish, for inviting me on, and I've been enjoying getting to know more about you, of what I've read online and everything, and some of your talks, and encouraged to have a live session with you today too. So, I appreciate what you're sharing right now around just the importance of leadership and embodied leadership to bring mindfulness in. I sometimes think about one element of mindfulness is remembering to be in the present moment, but also remembering to bring our wisdom into the present moment. And so as a leader, it's really key to do that, and also to bring our wisdom in when we're using technologies like artificial intelligence so that they can become symbiotic with us as people contributing to society.
I want to share a small personal reflection. When I began teaching mindfulness, especially to the leaders, I saw a lot of skepticism until they really started to experience the calm and clarity in themselves. In fact, I remember one of a CEO who joined our program after attending a few sessions of mindfulness, and especially after the retreat, he realized that he's been reacting to emails 2 o'clock at night. Every night, 2 o'clock, he gets up and he starts reacting to the emails. And after the program of mindfulness, now has improved his life, and he's also improved his performance. And not only this, he's now regularly hold mindfulness sessions for his teams and in his organization. So that's the impact of mindfulness in a workplace, on an individual life. As per your study, how does a regular mindfulness reshape our neural wiring to improve especially decision making and well-being and also interpersonal connection.
I think like one of the more replicated findings is in what's called the default mode network that involves the prefrontal cortex, but also other areas as well. And it's sort of this network that when we're just like on default mode, we're just kind of mind wandering, often thinking about things in relationship to ourselves. People can spend a lot of time in that mode, and mindfulness training seems to lessen the activity in that default mode network so that we're actually able to be more present. So you can imagine, say, in the workplace or even with our loved ones at home, if we can be fully present there, we're going to be able to respond wiser ways to situations that come up, but we'll also be able to be more direct and more clear and more present with the decisions that we're making moment by moment. I think another piece is, just as you talked about, the prefrontal cortex is areas of like logic and reason that seem to be enhanced in a number of studies. One of the findings that I've found most interesting in the neuroscience area is actually the increase in communication between different regions of the brain as a result of going through mindfulness meditation training. Say when we're thinking about complex challenges that we need to solve as leaders or in the workplace, if we can access more parts of our brain to be able to allow those different regions to reflect and to communicate, we can harness a greater amount of our wisdom and knowledge to be able to solve problems, especially if at the same time we're able to dampen down some of those fight or flight responses, like say in the amygdala or the insula, so that maybe a challenge is arising right now. And if we're not as triggered by it, and we can actually engage many other parts of the brain, it may be able to help us make a better decision in the moment to be able to serve society in a more important way.
When we talk about that reduction in default mode network and activating a task positive network, and how often can a human do that? Because it's a natural tendency to go into default mode network, and it's a very conscious choice to switch that thing off and then activate our task positive networks or a salient network. How can we build that more as a habit or behavior?
There's different forms of concentration practice that are in some of the Buddhist underpinnings. One is more of like a narrow focus where we pick a target, an object of meditation or an object of focus that we want to be on, and we're just with it. Another form of concentration is more open, where we're just with what is present right now in our thoughts, emotions, physical sensations. And so there's times to be on each, like say if we're working on a particular task, we might want to narrow in our concentration and really focus on that. But if we're at a gathering, a social gathering, or maybe in a meeting, we might want to be seeing the body language of everybody in the room through our eyes, listening carefully to what everybody's sharing, and then seeing what arises in ourselves and what seems would be an important contribution to make to that meeting, along with the deep listening that we do. And that might be more of an open form of concentration. And with meditation, we can train both of those. Maybe one of the most basic forms of meditation, like just say on the breath, or another object of meditation, like say the palms of the hands or the soles of the feet, or even sound. We're training ourselves to have that narrow focus. And the mind is going to wander thousands of times, millions of times probably. And when it does, just notice that, notice where it went, and does it often go to that spot? And in doing so, we actually get to know ourselves better, and the self-awareness comes. And then we invite the mind to come back to that object of meditation, whether it's the breath or whatever it is. And so we start to get better at concentrating and just seeing what arises. I think for most of us, we probably spend more time in default mode than is ideal, but it's not a bad thing to spend time in there. But with all the distractions that we have these days, it can be helpful to train ourselves in concentration practice. And there's real strategies to do that, like some of the ones I just mentioned.
Which finding of your research on mindfulness and human performance have surprised you the most, and why?
I think so we developed this program called the Mindfulness-Based Blood Pressure Reduction Program. So it's particularly focused on bringing blood pressure down, but through a lot of the main drivers of blood pressure, like physical activity and diet and weight loss and stress reactivity, medication adherence. And we developed a whole theoretical framework by which we thought it operated. And then we tested it, but then we also just asked people who went through the program how they thought it worked. And that's where some of the surprises came in. One of the things that really came up was just the importance of self-awareness, and not only the importance of it, but the ordering of it. When folks would say use the program to say influence their diet, their dietary patterns, it was often the self-awareness that came up first. So for example, someone shared, when they were on holiday and they, tended to eat less healthy food and maybe drink more coffee, for example, they noticed how it affected their relationship, their family members, that they were more irritable. And so that self-awareness would come up. And then the next step would be to do either an emotion regulation strategy to be able to say, maybe come back to their breath or go for a walk, or else it might also be an attentional redeployment strategy. So they'd actually focus their attention on something like, say, making a change in their dietary patterns the next day while they were on vacation so that they would be less grumpy with their family members. One of the surprises was not only the mechanisms that came up. In fact, we did hypothesize a lot of those mechanisms, but it was the ordering that self-awareness often came first with behavior change to be like, oh, wow, I'm doing this thing. And then now what? Now that I know that I'm doing it, what do I do? And so can I use my attention control through the meditation training to actually act on that insight that I have? Or can I use some sort of emotion regulation strategy? And so that ordering seemed to be quite important in terms of self-awareness first, and then attentional redeployment or emotion regulation strategies.
A lot of organizations ask, okay, we wanted to bring mindfulness, calculate the ROIs in a standard manner, how we do it. It's not specific procedure or surgical implant which we are giving it in a brain of employees. There's a long run study which need to be conducted to see what is an impact in organization. And SAP, they made a strong case on how it can actually improve human well-being, reducing stress. They found there is a 9% increase in employee engagement and 20% decrease in absenteeism. Do you think, is there a correlation in this behavior of people? Do you find something similar when the people start practicing mindfulness?
There is really good reason to do this kind of research in workplace settings, say around identifying what kind of outcomes are important to the employer, whether it's absenteeism or engagement at work or stress levels. We can work with organizations to identify what outcomes they want to target. And then we can also adapt mindfulness programs to target those outcomes. That's one of the interesting things about mindfulness programs is they're very adaptable. For example, we came out with a framework on just how to skillfully adapt mindfulness programs to different populations and contexts. It was published in 3 years ago. If absenteeism is a problem at a workplace, why is that? And can we start to deeply understand the drivers of absenteeism in this particular workplace? And if we understand the root causes, often we can target mindfulness programs to address those root causes. So maybe absenteeism is due to lack of engagement, or maybe it's due to a toxic work culture, maybe a particular set of individuals that are having challenges. And so how we address mindfulness might be pretty different. Yet at the same time, providing a general mindfulness program can give us some of the strategies around self-awareness, self-regulation, emotion regulation, stress reactivity that may help regardless of the situation, so that you're able to give some more kind of general resilience skills and performance skills that might be able to adapt to whatever comes up.
Can mindfulness truly move a needle in changing culture of organization? And can it then lead to higher productivity or engagement?
Yeah, good questions. I think with our experience around offering programs to other organizations, one of the ways that we've found has been most successful to really move the needle has been to start with the leadership, actually, just to a small-ish group of the leadership, maybe of a department, for example, or provide them with some, relatively brief mindfulness training, maybe at lunch, for example, but over a period of weeks. And usually something shifts, especially if they want it. If they reached out to us in the first place, they tend to want it. Then if that shifts in the leadership, we then start to roll it out more broadly through the organization. But at that phase, if the leadership felt it was worthwhile and got personal benefit from it, they're more likely to give the space to their employees, staff, to take the time to engage in it. MIT's Sloan School of Management, and they have a mindfulness and leadership club there too. So that's gotten me a bit more into the understanding the science, mindfulness training in organizational cultures, and Thana, where they took 4 different business schools and randomized people to take a 20-week mindfulness meditation program applied to business settings versus a control group, and followed them up, and then started to give them case studies. The Harvard Business School, releases all these case studies that are used in MBA programs, like Master of Business Administration programs, and then they're graded on the response, and found that the students had gone through the 20-week mindfulness training program were doing better on these case studies and than the control group. And then they started to look at the mechanisms of it, and the mechanisms sizably were going through not only enhances in mindfulness, but those those enhances in mindfulness levels were causing a reduction in stress levels, which were then leading to improvements in these case studies. And so was it increasing, for example, people's ability to like just take a step back to consider, and also to not get too worked up when this stress is coming up, say in these case studies or in real life?
How does mindfulness influences health metrics like a blood pressure or HRV, heart rate variability? How does it impact your behavior, well-being, and also your performance at workplace?
We developed the mindfulness-based blood pressure reduction program to engage more with the health behaviors that influence blood pressure, like weight loss and physical activity and diet. For example, we found about a 6 millimeter mercury drop in systolic blood pressure. About a 5 millimeter drop translates into about a 10% drop in cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes, for example. So it's clinically relevant. And we've shown that in 2 different clinical trials now. So around blood pressure, there's pretty good promise there. Such that, we even offer that program now to anyone around the world through the School of Professional Studies at Brown University. Around stress itself, certainly mindfulness-based stress reduction is targeted a lot towards shifting from like kind of stress reactivity to a stress response. The idea that stress isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can be. But we start to just get more specific. Like Alyssa Epple at University of California, San Francisco has done a lot of work on just really what stress is. It's one word, but it can mean so many different things. And so we start to look at, what's good forms of stress. We might call it eustress, like EUSTRESS. And so those are ones that like help us grow and develop. And so like, say, John Kabat-Zinn talked about how stress has an energy to it, and just like a sailor can harness the wind to sail their boat wherever they want. They might have to tack back and forth to get there, but they'll be able to use the energy of the wind to get wherever they want in the world. And so can we use stress almost as an energy to be able to allow us to propel forward in the directions that our wisdom is sharing, skillful. And then there's what's called like distress or overwhelm, for example. And so, sometimes mindfulness in those moments of distress, it can help to see like, look, I'm overloaded right now. I need to care for myself. And so what is my wisdom sharing in that moment of distress to be able to say, let's either shift my behavior in some way, let's take a break, let's, change my focus of attention to a place that's just safer right now, generally shows a reduction in stress.
What are the core qualities that will define the next generation of leaders?
What I would suggest is we learn strategies to regulate our emotions so that in the workplace, healthy. But I think a lot of us know of leaders that have their emotions kind of shut off and they aren't as connected to their employees and their employees aren't as dedicated to them. We also know leaders whose emotions are kind of out of control and that causes harm in itself too. So from the emotion side of things, I would say, characteristics of high quality leaders are ones that are very self-aware, their physical sensations, emotions, and thoughts, and respond to them in very skillful ways. I think another example of a high quality leader is someone who is an excellent listener and deeply understands the society that we live in, the emerging trends, and the organization that we live with, that we work with. From my perspective, even leadership in the organizations that I'm involved with, to have greater understanding of many different perspectives, even if they're uncomfortable perspectives, and to offer respect to every individual in the organization. There was a book called Crucial Conversations that came out like a couple decades ago, did work to really understand leadership and who really influence organizational culture and what the qualities were of those people who did. One of the things that it really boiled down to was respect. That even if someone disagreed, say with someone else in the organization or with another leader, if they were able to share their perspectives with great respect and understanding for that person, it was much more likely to make a change in the organization itself. And so at this moment in time where there is sort of a move, I would say in many ways towards more polarization within societies, having leaders who deeply understand and have great respect for people from all walks of life, and also have like the courage and the grit and tenacity to be able to express what they feel in a skillful way while really watching emerging trends and taking advantage of just the fact that everything changes.
What do you think as a technological change is happening, the real human leadership how and where it stands, and how mindfulness helps to promote that aspect.
From a leadership perspective, we need the leaders that are humanist and embrace the truth and the reality of where society is right now that has these technologies evolving. If a leader is not interested in it, then they're going to be blunted to a whole bunch of activity happening right now that has the potential to be of benefit to society and to be of harm to society. But I think there's a researcher at Harvard, but he's talked about how technologies have come all the time through society. Like when fire was first harnessed by humans, that was dangerous. It had a lot of benefit. And so we started to learn ways to use it fire skillfully. And it's similar with AI right now. It could be dangerous for sure. As humanity, how do we learn to harness this tool for the benefit of society too? And I think leaders that can be at the forefront of utilizing it for benefit to society, others will appreciate that.
What are the qualities humans should have? They become the master of technology, not the technology become master of humans.
Self-awareness and attention control are two of the big ones. I think the challenge is the grabbing of the attention around this. I think if we're able to enhance our concentration abilities, to be able to focus our mind where we choose to place it rather than where we might have some drive to go. And that's also where the self-awareness comes in of just thinking, can there be some self-awareness if I have some craving to see how many people liked my last post or whatever it is around social media and technology, and to notice that it's just a craving that we don't necessarily need to act on, and then to come back to the present moment with our attention control. And then also recognize there may be some hijacking of genetics by technology right now. Like anthropologically, we can't evolve genetically to deal with all these pulls on our attention. And then how can we put in the protections in society for these remarkable tools so that not only for us as adults that are maybe more in positions of power, but also for children and younger adults that are in less positions of power, to be able to create environments that allow them to benefit from these technologies and minimize the harm. And they're so new and there's so much money being made off them that it's hard to realize what the impacts are. But that said, it's incredibly important to realize what the negative impacts are and to act on them so that we can continue to utilize them for tools to foster happiness and health and well-being in society while minimizing the downsides. And I have every confidence that humanity is going to figure it out, but it does take time, and it is important to figure it out sooner than later, and respect all the people that are working on figuring that out now.
One practice, what you think as per your research study that made a big impact to build focus or attention?
So one is to seclude ourselves from sensual craving, so craving, say, for sweet foods or salty foods, looking at our screens, for example. So can we just take a couple of minutes where our phone is elsewhere? Maybe it's at the beginning of the day so that we haven't eaten anything that gives us a rush. We're able to just seclude ourselves from those sensual desires, for example. Can we notice if there's any restlessness and seclude ourselves from that? And so can we just play around with kind of removing ourselves from some of the things that pull our attention or that cause us to be restless, and then care for ourselves in the ways that foster concentration, whether it's through getting enough physical activity, through eating more healthily, maybe getting enough sleep, but also just taking some time to have our digital devices just elsewhere and to just be. Maybe it's just being in nature or just being with ourselves, just sitting quietly, even just for 2 minutes, and to notice what comes up in the mind and the emotions and the physical sensations, get to know ourselves just a little better, to remember to just come back to this moment, to play around with just giving ourselves just a bit of seclusion from the things that drive craving or restlessness, for example.
I've written a book called Observe. It's 101 practices based on my practices, which I started doing. It's crux of my about 20-25 years of my work. I created about 101 practices, and there are about 80 more practices as a bonus. An organization or a leader wants to weave mindfulness in their organization or into their culture to stay agile, engaged. What do you think is the easiest way to go about it?
Yeah, I would get connected groups that offer it an evidence-based way that is fairly universally accepted. Could be with organizations such as yours, for example, Brown University School of Professional Studies. We offer custom programs to organizations so it can work with them and that are grounded in the evidence-based approaches. There's the search inside yourself approach that was developed out of Google, I think, and I haven't seen the research done on it, but I certainly hear buzz about people appreciating it. It was developed in a workplace setting. The Oxford Mindfulness Foundation in the United Kingdom, are offering like a mindful leadership training program in Kyoto, Japan, for example, this year, and they try to really be grounded in evidence as well. Sometimes it's just like looking for organizations that both have the evidence side of things, but also deeper understanding of really what mindfulness is. And so to have organizations that have that deeper understanding, but the ability to apply it to workplace settings and can really draw from the evidence around it, I think is the magical combination, at least from my perspective.
I have a small rapid fire round for you, a few questions. So one book that changed your life.
Pieces Every Step by Thich Nhat Hanh.
One book that you go to every time when you're stuck in something.
One's called The Heart of the Buddha's Teachings by Thich Nhat Hanh.
Your favorite mindfulness practice?
Sutra on the Full Awareness of Breathing that has 16 contemplations. That's actually how I organized my book, The Mindful College Student, that particular teaching.
Your favorite food?
Fresh pears are remarkable, especially grown from my parents' pear trees.
One myth about mindfulness you always hear?
I can't think of one, honestly. There's often elements of truth to every myth.
Okay.
I try to listen to the elements of truth with them.
One thing you wish you knew earlier in your life?
Mindfulness. Self-regulation.
One practice would you tell to the busy leaders?
Take moments to stop.
You are a morning person or a night owl?
Morning person.
If you are in a stressful situation, what is the quick reset practice you do yourself?
Medium level would be to go for a walk in nature. Very fast would be to try to decenter, just to take a step back.
What gives you hope for the next generation of leaders?
Well, there's great opportunities for creativity and innovation.
Do you watch movies?
Sometimes Friday nights with my kids, my wife.
Okay, so what's your favorite movie of all time?
I love underdog. For some reason, Gladiator is coming to mind right now, but someone.
And in last question, in just one word, the future leadership is what?
Embodied.
Thank you, Eric, for your insight about mindfulness. Join us next time as we continue to explore what it means to be a leader of future. There are amazing takeaways from today's podcast. Thank you, Dr. Eric.